So we've done our power rankings ahead of the summer showdown, and now it's time to take a look at what we might see in terms of comps that these teams might run going into this June-July crossover. And we're going to see a bit more variety than we saw last month, simply because, well, there is no hero pool, because last month we saw Sombra, TRACER, Zenyatta and Reinhardt banned, which, you know, made for some interesting stuff going on, right? It played into some people's hands and it didn't play into other people's hands. And now that's gone. So we're going to see every single hero available this month for teams to play. That can have an impact on different teams for various different reasons. And some teams, I don't want them to fall back into habit from the main melee, which is possibly more detrimental to them. So we're going to concentrate on these 4 heroes coming back to play. And TRACER was very heavily meta in the main melee. Like, we saw an unbelievable amount of TRACER. And it's going to be very interesting to see how people factor the TRACER back in. And, to an extent, if they do so. So, right, let's start off with Zenyatta. Zenyatta is actually quite a big returner because Discord is so good, right? Zenyatta was heavily used in double barrier comms, and I was actually used in dive as well. So I expect Zenyatta to be used a bit more because we saw a lot of Mercy Zen back in the main melee. I think we will see that return to an extent, not everywhere, because it's not viable on every single map. At the moment the Overwatch meta is quite heavily map dependent. So we will have to see what happens with that. Sombra is an interesting one because Sombra is mainly used by East region teams. Mainly the Chengdu Hunters like to run a spicy bit of Sombra. Sometimes the Shanghai Dragons do as well. This is where Sombra I think will come in much more than anywhere else. So Sombra is not going to be a massive pick because she never is. She's very situational. But some teams are very good at getting value out of a good Sombra. And we've seen it mostly in the East region, as I said. So we could see a little bit of a renaissance from Sombra. I don't think we're going to see a massive one. Don't get me wrong. I think we'll see more TRACER than we will Sombra. Again, I could be wrong about this. But again, I don't think there has been a massive shift in the meta. So I'm not going to say that there's going to be this massive change. However, when we come to Reinhardt, that's where things start to go a little bit spicy. Because Reinhardt obviously enables the rush comps. We've seen these pseudo rush comps with Orisa that people like Paris and even Atlanta Reign have been running to a good amount of success, to be quite honest. So are teams going to factor this Reinhardt back in those comps? Probably. Because it is very difficult to run an Orisa in that comp because, well, Orisa is actually much slower than Reinhardt, obviously. However, some teams that have been getting a lot of joy with the Orisa may want to try and keep running it, but I don't think it's very likely. So then we bring on to the other question, right? Do we want to see some teams go back to this EU rush, which was the meta at the start of the season in some respects? The Reinhardt, Diva, Lucio, Bap, etc. Do we want to see that? To be honest, there are some teams that I feel could fall into the trap of going back to it. There was one team I'm kind of looking at in particular here, and this is London. Because London Spitfire liked to play the EU rush, and British Hurricanes saw a lot of success in it back in the day. However, they have looked better, in my opinion, in the June Joust when they're unable to play that comp. We've seen Haddy play the ball, we've seen Haddy play the Winston, and in my opinion he's been getting more value out of that. And I would like to see London stick to that more. Now, however, obviously London are now factoring in Sparker, so that may have an impact on what they decide to run, but I would like to see them move away from the EU brawl slightly and don't de facto go straight back to it now that the picks are available. I don't really want to see that, and I worry that some teams may go to it. There are some teams that this won't affect too much. So when I look at the likes of Florida, I said in the previous video, in the rankings video, that Florida and Washington should have benefited quite highly from having the meta as it was in the June joust. Because there was no Reinhardt, they could move more toward dive, but unfortunately that's not happening. So they now come back to a meta where it's much more versatile. They did better in the May melee, so on paper they should do better in the Summer Showdown considering they're under the similar conditions. However, you know, times change, so we can't guarantee that, but the return of TRACER I think is going to be monumental for a lot of teams. I think Dallas to an extent is going to have a big impact, because they're now going to be able to run that more TRACER Echo comp that they just simply weren't able to run last month, so they got stuck more to a Reaper Echo, which is very good, don't get me wrong. But I think they can spice it up with a TRACER involved, and I think that's where Dallas can get a bit more value. I know we've moved on to Dallas now from the London point of view, but those teams that are always going to get more value out of a TRACER are now going to look up in the standings slightly, I think, and start having a bit more joy. But the other perspective we can look at here is, you know, on a player by player basis. So, you know, we've seen actually Sparkle really pop off on the TRACER in the May melee, and he hasn't had access to that pick obviously recently. It'll be nice to see that come back from Dallas, and I really hope we see more of that from Dallas in June and July, or the rest of June I should say, because I think that's something that worked very well for them. Then we can move on to the sort of other thing of San Francisco Shock, Super and Smurf. We've seen a lot less Super in the previous month. That was mainly because, well, no Reinhardt, and we know how good he is on the Reinhardt. We also know how good he is on the Roadhog, but it hasn't really been called upon. However, Smurf, you know, he's got a great Orisa, great Winston, so we've seen a lot more Smurf, although we did see a little bit of Super rolling out on those picks recently. I'm expecting Super's play time to go up. I wouldn't be surprised. It's a little bit of a weird one for San Francisco because basically neither month has worked for them in the knockouts. So yeah, that's kind of rough, not gonna lie. It'd be interesting to see which way they go down with it, but yeah, I think we'll see more playtime from Super. We're going to see more playtime from these TRACER specialists and your Reinhardt specialists. So we're probably going to see actually more Jangu from the Houston Outlaws, because Houston Outlaws played a fair bit of Ryan and Winston for your main tank picks, and that's going to be in Jangu's ballpark. So I'm expecting to see more of him this month coming in from the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws have been fairly consistent in both months, they just haven't really performed in the knockouts, so we can't really say that Dreamer or Jangu has been better due to those hero pulls, but again, it is what it is. The other question is the comp that Shanghai Dragons played against Dallas and learnt throughout the finals in Hawaii, this bull dive comp that actually countered Dallas Fuel very heavily. Will we see that slowly creep into the meta? That's the question. It's a possibility, not gonna lie, or is it something that people are going to run to counter what Dallas run? So yeah, it's a debatable one. But considering how strong it looked in that finals appearance, I wouldn't be surprised if some other teams tried to start running it and pick it up and try and get some value from it. It'd be interesting to see if they do end up getting value from it. Shanghai learnt it in a very short space of time, which is very impressive from a team at that level. And it'll be interesting to see. I really don't know. It's difficult to tell, especially with the heroes coming back, because when you've got something like a Hammond, you can bring in a Sombra perhaps to kind of counteract things with that. But the hard dive really did get a lot of value in that Hawaii appearance in the June joust. So it wouldn't surprise me if the meta shifts more towards that and away from this rushed, brawly dive that Dallas have been playing completely out of the blue. It wasn't really a meta, but they just made it because, you know, they didn't have hit scans, so let's go with it. And it's been getting a lot of value so far, but now there's something that counters it. And so we're entering perhaps a little crossroads in the meta at our level, which says, what exactly are we going to do here? Again, even at contenders level, the meta is very fluid. There's some teams running a lot of Rush Brawl and it's just working. There's some people running Orissas and it's working. There's some people running more divey comps and it's working. So again, the meta is very fluid, very map dependent, and so we're probably going to see a lot of heroes on display once more, which has been the story of the season so far. And I don't think anyone's going to complain about that, because the more variety we see, the better, in my opinion. And it shows just how deep the hero pools of these teams are, which I think is also a massive test of skill and player adaptability, especially. But that's our meta preview for the Summer Showdown. We are going to move into our week's preview after this one. That'll be tomorrow most likely, and there will be some very interesting fixtures coming forward, including, I believe, the first battle for EU this season. That's going to be massively interesting, but I will be leaving it here for this one. All the socials for Illusion Gaming and myself are linked in the video description as per usual, so make sure you give the Twitter a follow, the Twitch a follow, and join the Discord if you want to talk to me and other people in the community. But for now, thank you guys so much for this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.